Well, I would say the first thing is the Muslim community has to understand citizenship and the whole concept. In the pre-modern tradition, there wasn't a concept of citizenship. There's a concept of what's called hakim and mahkum, which is the ruler and the ruled. So the idea that people that are under a government can actually participate in the framing of the government itself is a relatively new idea. And Muslims in the West they're learning this. I mean, we now have, it's quite extraordinary that there's a minister who's from a Muslim family and some MPs that were elected in the recent elections that are from the Muslim community. So it's happening in the United Kingdom. But I would argue that the concept of muwatana, which is citizenship, the idea that we are not a minority community in the ideal state of Western understanding of citizenry, that we are actually fully enfranchised citizens and have all the rights and responsibilities that go with that citizenship. That has to be inculcated into our youth and into our communities. I think the older generation they're excused in my estimation because they came from a very different background, but the younger generation really doesn't have an excuse. I think it's very important that they recognize the importance of fully integrating at that level. Because in my country, for instance, in the United States, especially at local government, you can enact radical changes in your local governments. You can ban alcohol, you can ban gambling, you can do a lot of things. And Muslims, and I agree with Dr. Ramadan fully about this, that Muslims need to be productive members of the community. They really need to be engaging the community fully. And those people, one of the biggest problems that we have is the concept of al-wara and al-bara, the idea of there's a certain segment of the Muslim community that teaches this idea that any allegiance, you have to have allegiance and enmity, which means allegiance to Islam alone and enmity to anything other than Islam. And therefore to vote is an act of kufr, in a non-Muslim state. And we have people here that get public airspace to actually expound these ideas on a regular basis. These ideas are sectarian and a very, very marginalized minority view in Islamic history. Allegiance to a state is not kufr by any means. And Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya argues that the classical formation of what was called Dar al-Harb, Dar al-Islam, and then Dar al-Ahad or Muwada'a, which is, those were the three classical formations: the abode of war, the abode of peace, which was the Islamic world, and then the abode where you had treaties with the people. He argues that there's a new abode, which is what he calls the Darul Maqam or Dar al-Muwatana, which is the abode of citizenship, which is where Muslims are citizens. And a Muslim can technically become a prime minister or at least a president in the United States, and that was argued 200 years ago. It was actually in the constitutional debates, one of the issues raised is that if there were not religious tests, a Muslim could eventually be elected president in the United States. That was argued 200 years ago by the Founding Fathers. And the argument was overridden because Ireton argued that if the American people elected a Muslim, it would be for one of two reasons. The Americans had all become Muslims, and then that was their democratic prerogative. And he said that's highly unlikely. And then he said the other would be that they found in a Muslim all the virtues that they wanted to lead their society. And in that case, again, it was their prerogative. So they actually voted early on based on a Muslim issue. And so Barack Obama has a Muslim grandmother, and he's president of the United States. His grandmother was there in hijab sitting next to him at the inauguration. So we now have a paternal side of the family in the White House that's Muslim, right? So, I mean, that's quite extraordinary as an event. And I think we can't underestimate the importance of the election of Barack Hussein Obama, because that election, first of all, signals that the name barrier no longer exists in the United States of America. If your name's Mahmoud or Hussein or Abdullah, it's not a barrier anymore. That's the first important hallmark. The second is that he does openly have Muslim relatives, And that is an incredible statement. And the third, and this is what I find most extraordinary, he's from the Luo tribe in Kenya. In Kenya, had he ran for president of Kenya, he could not have been elected because of the tribe that he's from. And that is a fact that Fuad Nehdi will confirm. The Luo tribe is a weaker tribe, but he overcame tribe and race in the United States and became president. So I think it's very important for Muslims to recognize that we do have a vital contribution. And finally, in Manchester, Bradford, Sheffield, Birmingham, in these cities, we are moving into numbers of Muslims that if the demographics are correct, and they often aren't, so I do put that caveat out, but if the demographics are correct, it won't be long before some of the largest cities in the United Kingdom have majority Muslim populations. The Muslims need to very seriously consider the fact that they will have to be running city councils, that they will have police stations that are under a Muslim constabulary. All these things have to be really taken into consideration, and Muslims, instead of rioting, they really need to think about establishing think tanks where they can think seriously about their presence in the United Kingdom and in the United States and in Canada and in Germany and all of these places, because we need to address these real issues, and we need to alleviate the very serious and real fears, and it's not always phobia, because phobia in a classical medical definition is an irrational fear. But the fear of Muslims is not necessarily irrational for many people. The high crime rates that are in our communities in Europe are cause for concern for many, many people in these countries. And so it's very important that the Muslims address these issues, and one of the most important ways of doing that is through civic engagement.